This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, we have with us today, to be heard nationally, the 54th Comptroller of the state of New York. And if he didn't have enough of an assignment before, he's got a new one now. And we welcome Thomas P. DiNapoli to our program.
Rabbi and Rev, it is great to be back with you once again, and congratulations on being syndicated and having an even broader reach, more listeners, going national. It's a great opportunity for more people to learn from the two of you.
Well,
thank you, Tom. Yeah,
you were with us from the beginning, Tom. You were with us at the very beginning, and have always been with us, and we're certainly great.
It says something about our society, Rabbi. I'm sorry to cut you off, but what the people want to hear civil discourse. They want to hear differing views without demonizing or arguing. Look, I understand the landscape. I understand that people make a lot of money in the echo chamber, but I think we bring something a little bit different, and it's proven by our continued growth over the last 7 years. So thank you.
It's interesting. Last week, or the week before, we had a guest on the program, and you get emails from people who listen, and one person emails me, I felt your guest is too much on the left. And then I got an email from someone who says, your guest, center right, if I had a place. The same person. But they're identified, on the left, on the right. Forget what the person had to say. It just, immediately you're labeled.
Yeah.
And the minute you're labeled, you pay a price for that in certain circles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one reason why I enjoy coming on your program, and I really have never said no whenever either of you have called, you provide a very open forum and Reverend Bernard, to your point, a very civil discussion of issues. You have had the whole spectrum of points of view over the years, and of course, adding in the spiritual dimension as the two of you do so beautifully, and that was certainly something that I think we all need to do a better job of in our society these days. But doing that and given the different perspectives and backgrounds that you bring to the discussion, to have the conversation with you always to be an open forum and a civil forum, I think that's exactly what we need more of in our country today.
If I could be somewhat biblical on this, we in Jewish tradition have what's called phylacteries. You've seen the leather straps that people put on the head and around the arm. If you open up the phylacteries worn on the head have different compartments. When it comes to the hand, one compartment. And the message is, when it comes to thinking, there are different points of view. When it comes to action, hopefully people together stand up as one against various challenges. But we live at a time where people think there should only be one compartment in the head. It's only, as I said, you're entitled to their point of view, not your own point of view.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. I think we lose out.
Yeah.
I think different points of view help us grow. They expand us. They give us different perspectives. I think they enrich us in the complexities of life. So I think it's very, very important that we have that. And let's get started with something, because you're comptroller for the state of New York. Would you say that your job is a little different because it's New York State as compared to other states? Every state has a state controller, correct?
It often has different titles. In New York, we actually do it in a slightly different way. for your listeners that may be from other states, more typically they may have a state treasurer or a state auditor, and sometimes a state controller as well. For instance, California, another big state, often compared to New York, they have an elected controller and elected treasurer. They have two. They split it up. In other states, this job is sometimes done through appointment rather than election. So in New York, the history goes back a long time. We've kind of married together the role of being the auditor for the state and for local governments as well, for that matter, and the treasurer, kind of keeping the books in line, and controller in terms of evaluating contracts and payments. And then the other big dimension is managing the state pension fund, which in most other states, except for Connecticut and North Carolina, pension funds are actually managed by a board of trustees. In New York, we have a sole fiduciary model, as we call it, where I'm the sole trustee. So, yeah, I'd say, Rev, that in New York we do it differently, and we've consolidated a lot of the different financial responsibilities under the elected office of state controller. So there's a lot under our purview.
There's something different about your position, though, Tom, and that is, over the years that I've known you, and it's been a privilege, you don't get involved in the internal political battles. You somehow manage to get people on both sides of the aisle, very much informed, understanding what you have to do, but you're not in the fray. Am I right?
Well, I've always taken the point of view, first of all, the most important qualification for this job is to be independent. And as much as you can, not to be tied to a partisan agenda. And I think that's, the office was set up with the perspective that you're not a legislator, you're not the governor, you're not weighing in on every issue. You're really looking at the bigger picture. You're making sure the money is spent with integrity and with responsibility. And, sometimes people say, oh, you should take a position on every single issue, every single bill is proposed. We would lose our independent perspective, our objectivity, if you will. And especially when it comes to the audits, we do audits of state agencies, but local governments all across the state. Some of them are run by Democrats, some by Republicans. If my work and my efforts are viewed only through a partisan lens, there's no credibility then for the work that we do. And most of our employees, especially those on the audit side, are civil service. I don't know if they're Republicans or Democrats. They're not hired because of political background. The balancing act for me, though, and as a gentleman of the cloth, you've got to do balancing acts now and then too, is that I still have to run for office, which means I have to be part of a political party, which means you do have to still have those relationships as well. So is it a challenge sometimes to maintain that independence and that objectivity so the work has credibility, and at the same time have to go back to voters and have to get a party endorsement? Yeah, it could be a challenge, but I've always erred on the side of the impartiality, because I think that's given the work that we do credibility, and so far that has not hurt me in terms of the politics.
But you've been controller for 15 years, so
let's
talking
say
about
18,
beyond.
But Rev, it's lucky 18. It's high.
Yeah,
18 now.
That's right.
Yeah,
I'm thinking of the terms. Yeah, but you're out. Your term is going beyond that of governor, so it doesn't matter who's governor per se.
Right.
You can still continue in your position, and the voter are reelecting you. So you must be doing something right.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you look at the history in New York, and Rabbi will remember this because he's older than you and I.
Together,
you had two legendary names in important offices who, no matter who was winning governor, they always won. Louis Lefkowitz, Attorney General, and Arthur Levitt, State Controller. It didn't matter whether it was I guess going back to Harriman, Rockefeller, Carey, Cuomo. I mean, you go down those two always were elected. Different parties. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat. But the view was that being the state's lawyer, the people's lawyer, being the financial officer, those positions were really separate from the politics of the day. So, so far we've maintained that track record, and I hope it will continue.
So is that about having the competence to do the job as well as, getting along, of course, with...
Donate now to Toys for Tots, working year-round. Go to toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots supports children in need throughout the year with programs like the Toys for Tots Literacy Program. Established in 2008, has provided over 60 million books to disadvantaged children. The Toys for Tots Literacy Program is committed to providing disadvantaged children with direct access to books and educational resources that enhance their ability to read and communicate effectively. Go to toysfortots.org.
Those that are in leadership, because we're looking at a situation now where it seems to be a trend that you only want people in position who are aligned with your political party or your particular political agenda. How do you respond to that?
It's a tougher environment. Everything is more polarized and more partisan. I think that's a trend that's been going on for a while. I think it certainly has been accelerated in recent times, given the discourse and how harsh, the rhetoric has been. I mean, look, sometimes, I was a major in American history, right, in college. The notion of there to be vitriolic comments and disparaging words about your opponent, that was not invented in recent years. I mean, that's what it's been around. It's been around a long time. Or for newspapers to be very partisan and not print the accurate news, but just print what's favorable to their particular side. It's not new, but I think it's gotten more extreme in our current time compared to where we were maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I think that does present a challenge, but I think it does get back to, for my office anyway, I can't speak to what it would be like if I was, running for the legislature again, as I did a number of times. As long as the work is done in the right way, and that gets back to the competence, the word that you use. So when we hire people, and it's done, largely civil service merit, if you're hiring people to be auditors, you want people who are trained in auditing and CPAs. If you're hiring people to do the investment work for the pension fund, you want people with a track record and professionalism there as far as understanding about investment opportunity. If you want someone to be helping you with analyzing the state budget recommendations, you want someone that's got a background in looking at budgets and understanding policy implications of how money is spent. So the goal for me is to make sure that our hiring is done, and even for those limited positions that are, exempt, where I have more discretion, people of competence, not people who, I hate to use the phrase, but political hacks, not there just to be part of a political operation. And I think that's been the success of my predecessors as well. I don't own that success. I think that's been the tradition of the Comptroller's office in New York State.
I remember when Mike Bloomberg was mayor, he spoke about nonpartisan elections. And you've heard, Joe Liebman of blessed memory talked about no labels. And listening to your description of your position, do you think it might be possible to have a person running for comptroller who says, look, I don't belong to either party, or to have it as a nonpartisan kind of approach? Because if a Republican were running against you, where would the difference lie? I mean, if you're both, looking at what's best for the people, investment, and the pension funds, you're looking through the same lens, aren't you?
Yeah, you should be. It's an interesting question because, and someone asked me this, I forget it was last time or 2 times ago that I was running. Actually, when you think about it, to your point, of all the offices, this is probably the one that would most lend itself to running without a party label, to being a process not tied to a political party. I think the challenge when I've thought about it is, given the current structure in New York, which unlike other states, right, probably many of your listeners are in a state where they have what's called open primaries, where you can declare your allegiance even on the very day that you're going to vote. In New York, we have a closed primary process where you have to be in a political party to vote in a primary. Some people argue that's part of why we don't have as strong a turnout of voters as we should, because you have to declare to be in a party. And more people, especially young people today, don't want to be in any political party. And so when you're not in a political party, though, in New York State, again, different than many other states, you can't vote in a political in a party primary to help select candidates. So I guess the challenge to implementing that, where the idea would be in a state like New York, where the laws are very different, or in a sense kind of restrictive and really more directed to party politics in the traditional way, is there a way you could separate out this office and you'd have to figure out how would you put people on a ballot? New York City has the process where if there's a special election, like for city council, if someone resigns or moves out for some reason, the candidates run not in a party, and it is a nonpartisan election. I don't know how you would structure it, but of all certainly the statewide offices, this would be the one it would make the most sense to do something like that.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Let me understand something. The oversight involves the city controller, right, who is running for mayor against the mayor. I mean, what's wrong with that picture? What's wrong with
and the city council speaker?
Yeah,
and the city
might be running.
Yeah. Also, yeah.
Well, welcome to New York. I mean, we are in an historically unprecedented dynamic now, and look, for New York State, we need New York City to be functioning. New York City's had many struggles coming out of COVID, as we all know. There's still many issues with regard to homelessness and food insecurity and housing costs and public safety, office buildings that are not back, to where they were in terms of people showing up. Not as many people using the mass transit system. The funding for the MTA, everybody's been reading across the country about congestion pricing, New York City's effort to be the first city in America to do that. There's a lot going on now, and the concern is that the city not go backwards during this time. Look, the mayoral race is on anyway. There's going to be an election. That'll sort out much of this. But we've got to get through the next few months and certainly get through November, keeping the city moving forward and dealing with these many challenges. And on top of all that, for New York City and for the state, what's going to happen? We know debates are going on right now in Washington, federal budget. A lot of talk about cutbacks to programs that New York State depends on significantly: Medicaid, health care funding for programs like SNAP and nutrition programs. What is that going to mean for the city budget, for the state budget? What's it going to mean for everyday people in our city and our state? So we really need to have the city functioning, the state functioning, and hopefully not seeing the worst of what could come out of Washington as they try to balance the federal budget. I'm hoping that tax cuts are not going to be financed by hurting people who are in need and that are depending on those Medicaid funds for a loved one in a nursing home or providing basic nutrition through a program like SNAP. We shouldn't be doing tax cuts on the backs of people who are in need.
But you're not going to be policing the office. You're going to be working with the City Department of Investigation, right?
Well, no, that'll be that will more be probably the Inspector General role. Then our role really will be more about the city finances. So looking at city budget, again, scrutinizing not just short-term spending, but long-term balance of the city financial plan. We do have an audit division that will still do its work. And you're right, Rev, we do have an investigations unit, but the additional funding did not go to those parts of our operation. They're still going to do what they've been doing, but the additional funding is more to be looking at the city budget, and again, with a lot of concern about what may happen with federal cutbacks and how the city will manage that. Because we monitor city spending, city services, how are city services being delivered. We put a lot on the website for people to know, what's going on right in their own community. So it's really more that oversight role rather than the investigations role that we're involved in with this additional money that the governor is proposing.
Right. So it's more of a fiscal oversight.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right.
So Tom, if you had to describe the state of New York City, the fiscal state of New York City, we all have to balance our checkbooks. It sounds to me like there are a lot of ifs. If this happens, we're in trouble. If it doesn't happen, we won't be in such trouble. But we are not in the best possible place.
The good news for the city, and it's been similar for the state as well, the revenues have been coming in higher than projected. And also in terms of city spending, some of the steps that the current administration took early on were beneficial in terms of the bottom line. And look, the other reality is, especially given some of the changes with the new administration, the spending that's required for migrants, asylum seekers, that's going down more quickly than had been anticipated because the number of migrants coming in is going down. So when you look at the city's budget today, we see balance because the city is able to apply past surpluses to keep the budget in balance. The problem is when you look at the out years, there are budget gaps. And the concern that we have is that we think the city has not fully anticipated some of those risks. And one of the big concern I have for the city is that they have not added to their rainy day reserve funds, the money that you put aside when you have some kind of a budget or financial emergency. They did a better job of that a few years ago, but in recent years they haven't built up those reserves. The state's done a little bit of a better job on that front. But the problem really is going to come, it's twofold, right? If this economy goes in the wrong direction. If these tariffs come in, that's a big topic now, tariffs, and what will that mean for the economy? What will it mean for the stock market? What will it mean for our investments? What could that mean for the pension fund? That's one area of uncertainty, and there's a fair amount of volatility in the markets now that we see, price of eggs and everything else that's driving everybody a bit crazy these days. The second one is what I mentioned earlier. What will be the new federal-state and federal-city relationship? Will we see the kind of cutbacks that many people are concerned about happen? And if it throws the city budget significantly out of balance and they don't have adequate reserves to cover it, what happens then? Do they cut back on services? Do they raise taxes even higher? And there are a lot of ifs. There are a lot of uncertainties. But I had recommended, and I wish the city had done more since they are in a better budget position right now, put some of that more of that money into their reserves. Have that cushion there for what may come down the road. And if you don't need it, fine, but fair to say there's certainly some level of probability that there will be some financial impact, both from the economy and from what Washington will do to balance their budget.
Well, our parents used to say that, didn't it, Rev? Our parents used to say, you got to put some money away for rainy day. It's the same. It's the same thinking, right? Yeah.
Well, the problem with government is that we, and I was in the legislature for many years, where you're looking at the budget, you're on a 2-year term, you're looking at the next election, it tends to lend itself to short-term thinking, right? And that's one of the advantages or one of the responsibilities, I guess, of being the state controller is that we don't look at short-term. We look at long-term. And it's sometimes very hard to get legislators and executives, meaning governors or mayors, to understand that it's not just about making a decision to make you popular today or popular for the next election, but what people really need is the kind of responsible thinking that long term will provide the services people require. You could promise all kinds of things and spend all the money you have today, and then if you come up short a year or two later, what are you going to do? Go back and say, I got to cut programs, I don't have the money anymore? Or you're going to say, I got to raise taxes to keep these popular programs? That's how you end up in a fiscal hole.
So is congestion pricing working? It's still, a short period of time, but there are those who are saying it's working because it's raising revenue. I was surprised. I was in a vehicle, and the driver was telling me, he says, I guess congestion pricing is working. And this is a gentleman who was very upset about it.
Mm.
How do we measure this, that it's working or not?
Well, I guess two ways to measure it. In terms of the money coming in, the MTA collected over $48 million in the first month. So that probably was a little higher than had first been anticipated. So it's projected to bring in, $500 million on an annual basis. So I would say in terms of revenue to be generated for the MTA then to issue bonds and pay for their capital plan, it's working. In terms of impact of congestion, a lot of that I think is still anecdotal. It's still a relatively new program. I think most people would say there seems to be less congestion in Midtown Manhattan, Central Business District, and so on. Others may argue, if you're north of 60th Street, it seems to be a little more activity because people are, going in there and parking their cars, so they don't have to go into the congestion zone. So I think we probably need Rev a bit more time to see what the real impact is on congestion. I think the advocates are saying it is making a difference. Ridership has certainly been up in terms of use of public transit, so that might be one indication that the goal of moving people out of cars and onto public transit, that may in fact be working. Some people feel the air is a little cleaner. It might be a little too soon to make that complete judgment. But I would say we still have to get more data. In terms of money coming in, yeah, that part of it's working. And at least anecdotally, some people feel it's been an easier commute into the city than it had been.
Yeah, but there are those who are also saying if we would arrest the fare beaters,
yep,
right, we wouldn't have to be thinking of congestion pricing.
Well, look, I mean, the estimates have been as high as $700 million loss from fare beating. So, I think it would be fair to say, fair, F-A-I-R, that would help solve some of the MTA's budget issue, probably more so on the operating side. The MTA has a very ambitious capital plan to maintain the structure of the system, to replace the aging subway cars and trains and buses, to build in resiliency to deal with climate change, to make the subway stations accessible for people with disabilities. You're going to need a lot more than just dealing with those beating the fares. So the capital plan, which is very ambitious, it did need an infusion of capital funding. As I said, and apropos of my earlier comments about my role, I didn't say whether you should or shouldn't do congestion pricing, but I did say if you don't want it, you have to come up with the money that's going to fund the capital plan. Because if the system goes into a state of poor repair, on top of the concerns about cleanliness and public safety, and people aren't going to be using the trains and the buses and the subways, the system can't finance itself because it really depends on ridership. So you need to keep the system in good repair so people go back to using it. So if you don't want congestion pricing, and maybe we'll be forced not to have it, right? It's going to be in the courts ultimately to settle this, I think. You got a big number. You got many billions and tens of billions of dollars you got to come up with to fund the capital plan. So it's a big issue for New York. Big issue for New York.
Rev, let me tell you about Tom DiNapoli. So years ago, Tom and I were honored at the same time on Long Island, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, by the Sons of Italy and B'nai B'rith.
Yep.
Right? And we were both very young at the time, but it was just such a wonderful moment to be linked to you. And that relationship has remained strong over the years, and I'm just very proud of it.
Well, the friendship has been a gift, and as I recall, the Sons of Italy, they honored you, and B'nai B'rith honored me. I think it was
exactly. Yeah.
And besides our wonderful relationship, I have to say, if you want to be inspired, go to the Christian Cultural Center and learn from Reverend Bernard. I mean, the two of you have you're not quite in my church, but I view you both as great spiritual allies and individuals who provide really incredible leadership. We are blessed in New York. I say this for your listeners across the nation. We have incredible spiritual leadership in every tradition, and the Rev and the Rabbi that you're hearing on this radio show are two of the finest, and it makes New York a better place in so many ways.
Who could argue with your impeccable, impartial judgment? I mean,
that's why I've been quiet.
Yeah. and the other thing is, Tom, I want to say, as a member of the Jewish community, thank you, because of the investment you have made in state of Israel bonds over the years, probably the highest of any other state. You are a great friend. I know it's a sound investment, but you didn't have to do it. There are some who don't do it, and they have the opportunity to do it, but you really are there for us. Well,
my biggest prayer of all is for peace in the world, and it has to start with peace in the Middle East. It's really been very, very difficult for us to see what's been going on there, and we have to stick with our friends. That's the bottom line, but we need peace for everyone. Let's hope 2025 will see resolution of some of this. I mean, you think about the war in the Ukraine, the Middle East. I mean, there's so many flashpoints. Let's as Americans focus on how we stay united, because the world needs healing, and America has to provide that leadership for the healing.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thomas P. DiNapoli, 54th Comptroller of the state of New York, and really respected by people on both sides of the aisle, and that's a great achievement.
Well, I'm proud to be proud to be part of your syndication.
Thank you so much, Tom.